All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Cynthia Brown. She is a part of the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sabrina.
So I want to get started with you first. How did this actually come to be, the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity? And I ask because we have been pushing for something like this to happen on the national level. I think a lot of different organizations and activists have been pushing for that, and obviously nothing has come of it on the national level. Roger Meadows actually told me about you. So this is the first time I actually heard of someone trying to do this through the states. So how was this formed and why was this formed in Ohio?
Okay, let me start with my why story. In 2017, my nephew, Kareem Ali Nadir Jones, he was killed by Columbus Police Department. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He went outside responding to his girlfriend said there were young kids throwing rocks at his vehicle. But when he goes outside, he encounters 2 Columbus police officers. Remind you, it's daylight. So Kareem, they go back and forth. So Kareem went to walk away. Now, sometimes we know Black men wear their pants that sag. He went to pull his pants up. The officer shot him twice in his back. When he hit the ground, they shot him in his face and in his neck. He was the first body cam case in the state of Ohio, period, where you see a Black man take his last breath on the camera. This is a fact. So I knew right then I was going to college in Arizona for political science, majoring in public policy. So I knew the only way was to change the law was work with the lawmakers. Well, in Ohio, we have a Republican-controlled General Assembly. We'd worked with them for years. In 2020, after George Floyd died, it was lame duck session. We had multiple bills introduced, but none of the bills got a hearing. So we have exhausted all remedies with working with the lawmakers. So I knew that since Ohio is one of 30 plus states that will allow citizens to put a ballot initiative on the ballot, we knew we had to move forward with that action. In fact, that is the only call to action for accountability that I see. And right now we're polling over 60% because one of our coalition partners, Campaign Zero, we're fortunate, they did the polling. And over 60 up to 87% Ohioans, whether you're white, Black, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, wherever you sit, they agree there has to be accountability. And they want to see this unconstitutional doctrine that was created by the courts in debt.
That's right. And this was created by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
It was the Supreme Court who said it. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why we can't get this, or it seems like we can't get this done on a national level. First and foremost, sorry for your loss. There have been a number of stories like this that we have heard. A lot of people, everyone knows about George Floyd, but there have been several George Floyds. And I think that for some people, that was the first time that they saw something like that happen on camera, on the world stage to see, actually, because this was an international, it actually transferred into an international event. The protest started here in the US, and the next thing you know, it was all over the world. But I don't think people realize just how often this happens. And if we did not have qualified immunity, I don't think there would be as many police brutality cases. I want to get your take about the media coverage of these events, because something that I noticed after Derek Chauvin was sentenced, it seemed like to me mainstream media was not covering police brutality cases as much anymore. And not just mainstream media. I felt like independent media didn't cover it as much as well. And I want to get your take about that. Like, why do you feel that they don't highlight those stories as much anymore? And do you feel that the protest had anything to do with that?
You know what? That's a good question. And I've noticed that myself because we recently had another high profile case in Columbus, Ohio with Jason Meade, who shot Casey Goodson going in his house with a Subway and keys in his hand. So he was just, the jury gave it a mistrial. So it was covered by national news, but we know the outcome because Columbus, Ohio is number one in the country for killing young Black men ages 18 to 40. So let's go back to your original question. I think the news media, they focuses on certain cases, like we had a high profile attorney on that case. So a lot of times when you saw George Floyd take his last breath, that woke up a lot of people, whether you're white or Black, Democrat, Republicans. They woke up to see this is our reality. This is what happens in certain zip codes if you're Black or brown, or in my case, my nephew was another Black man that lost his life. So the media, they like to hype up the story. Plus it sells. That sells papers and it brings them the top ratings. So I think a lot of times they're at ratings. Is my MSNBC or CNN going to get all their ratings for the night? We look at Fox, who was we know they're very, what's the right word I want to use? They select certain stories because they're not going to say that the police are never at fault.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think white America has somewhat turned back, because they were out there protesting, hey, we want accountability and we have to end this systematic practice and all this. But you notice they're gone now. Yeah. They're silent.
Yeah. I mean, and that's unfortunate. Actually, I noticed that happened after Donald Trump lost and Joe Biden won. That was the first time I really took a good look at it. I said, oh, they realize or they think that the problem has been solved because Donald Trump lost, right? We're still having police brutality incidents under Biden's presidency. It doesn't matter if the president is a Democrat or Republican. But I want to bring up the website here. So this is the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity website. And it says here, let me remove the banner down here so you guys can see. It says amending the Ohio Constitution to end qualified immunity and hold government accountable. It says qualified immunity is a legal loophole that makes it almost impossible to hold our government accountable through the civil court when it violates our constitutional rights. And I want to click on about up here. And it says fighting for accountability in Ohio from the grassroots to the state house to the ballot box. So one of the things that I've been pushing for on this show is to get people involved with ballot measures in their state. So I live in Massachusetts, also a ballot initiative state. I've tried to explain to people how important it is to organize on the local level, and some of these policies that we've been trying to get passed on the national level that are just not happening. We can actually pass some of these policies through the states. And I've seen it happen with my state. You've seen it happen with your state, I'm sure. In reference to the ballot measure, is this going to be on the ballot for 2024, or have you met the signature requirements? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, we want it to be on 2024. We are currently collecting our initial 1,000 signatures again. We've been denied multiple times by Dave Yost, whether he says our title was misleading or our summary was inaccurate. So our attorney has rewritten the language again. So we are in the process, as I speak, collecting those signatures, going to different, events. So we hope to resubmit by February 28th.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're traveling statewide collecting these signatures. We've already submitted signatures from 44 counties. And I will add this, we've collected over 20,000+ signatures since we started this process.
That is amazing, because that's one of the hardest parts for people who are not aware is collecting the signatures. And I'm sure in Ohio, it has to be a wet signature, right?
Physically signed the petition, yes.
Yeah, same thing here. It also says on here, it says our mission, the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity is a grassroots organization dedicated to ending qualified immunity statewide and holding government accountable when it violates our rights. And I think this is incredibly important. How many people would you say are involved with this coalition in particular?
Okay, our coalition, we have 5 committee members. It's myself, because I'm the founder. We have Jenny Sue Rowe, who is with Veterans in Rehab. Her husband was killed by law enforcement in 2020. He was shot 8 times close range. He was a veteran. He came home. He was having a post-stress traumatic disorder, and they not once tried to de-escalate the situation. They knew he was a veteran when they called, the phone calls started coming in. Then we have Derek Jameson. Derek was sentenced to death row. He was wrongfully convicted. He served over 20 years for murder for crimes he did not commit. The prosecutor, who has absolute immunity, withheld over 35 pieces of evidence. Then we have Dr. Hamza Kambar. He's a veteran. He's currently with the Cleveland Police. So we're not anti-police. That's, I want to stress for sure. I have one nephew who was killed by law enforcement, and my other nephew became a state patrol officer in 2018. So they can't never label this family as anti-police. So we have multiple coalition partners, within Ohio. We have our national campaign partners, which is the National Campaign to Win Qualified Immunity, Campaign Zero, Dream Quarterless, and we're just growing our coalition, as we move forward, because once we get approved, all eyes are going to definitely be on Ohio and all the other states. I hope they follow us in Ohio as case presidents.
That's right. And I want to take a look at the timeline here as well. It says, let's go down this way. This is the important thing I think people need to understand, which they may not be aware of. In 1982, the Supreme Court strengthens qualified immunity to protect corrupt Nixon aides in the case Harlow versus Fitzgerald. 2017, the Congressional Research Service releases a report on qualified immunity. In 2018, the Department of Justice announces a review of qualified immunity. 2019, the Supreme Court declines to hear a case that would have clarified the scope of qualified immunity. So they didn't even want to hear a case to clarify the scope of it. And in 2020, the death of George Floyd sparked national protests and renewed calls to end qualified immunity. So what people have to understand is that this all started with the Supreme Court, and that was 1967. They established qualified immunity doctrine in the case of Pearson versus Ray. So I think this is part of the reason why it's difficult to get this to happen at the national level. The Supreme Court can be a tough one, I think, to fight against, and they're very selective about which cases they choose to hear. Is there any push in reference to this movement to perhaps expand to other states as well?
Well, Sabrina, other states are watching what we do in Ohio. They're paying close attention to the policy. So with that being said, we know the George Floyd bill stalled in the House and the Senate. We had a Democratic president. It stalled. If they had just been bold and passed it, we wouldn't be here now, because that would be the law of the land, which is why every state in their constitution, they can do the same thing, put it on the ballot and let the electors decide.
Yeah, I could just imagine all of you that are watching, if you live in a ballot initiative state, this is something to think about. Especially those of you that I know are really passionate about this issue, this is something you should think about trying to implement this type of ballot measure in your state too. And what's interesting with the state of Ohio, I know you said there's over 60% of people that actually support this. Ohio is now
up to 87% on certain questions they were asked. That's high.
Up to 87%. So what's
up to 87%?
Yeah, I wanted people to hear that, because Ohio has now been classified as a red state. But you see, even when it comes to this particular issue, this is why the ballot measures are so important, because you actually get the voice of the voter. That is direct democracy, unlike us electing representatives and hoping that they pass legislation. With ballot measures, you are actually voting on the issue yourself, which is, I wish it was that way nationally, to be honest. But I think that what's really interesting about this is that it brings this question up again. And I would really like to see you, Cynthia, go on more shows, because I do feel like since the death of George Floyd, this discussion in particular has kind of become somewhat mute.
Yes, I agree.
So I think what's important as well in reference to Ohio, I was just thinking about this the other day. We've been talking a lot on the show about Israel and Gaza, what's happening there, and with the IDF. It's important, again, for people to understand that the IDF trains the police force in the United States. So just think about this in reference to accountability. If you're wondering why police officers are not held accountable in the United States for police brutality, well, look at where the training came from. And you see the IDF is also not held accountable. So always try to connect the two. So some of the things that our government is supporting abroad financially, it's connected to what's happening in the United States as well.
Well, 5 states have already ended qualified immunity. It first started with New York City, Colorado, New Mexico, Connecticut, and Nevada. Nevada ended it for all government officials, public servants, including law enforcement and correction officers.
Wow. I did not know that about Nevada. That is interesting. Did they do that by ballot measure too?
The Supreme Court did it. Their Nevada Supreme Court. They were all done by their General Assembly, but in New York City, it was their city council that took action because you had all these crazy lawsuits, like over $500 million. That's a lot of money to be paying for these officers' misconduct. Think about like that. If you are a conservative, whatever, fiscal conservative, think about the money the taxpayers are paying for this misconduct. So officers should be required to have professional, mandatory insurance. They have to be responsible when they take a life. They have to be responsible. That's accountability. That's how you weed the bad ones out, because sooner or later, they're not going to be able to get insurance if they keep on doing the same thing over and over again. Perfect example. In Columbus, Ohio, we have law enforcement officers that have not killed once, twice, 3, but 4 times. And they're still on the force. They have been promoted. Ask yourself, why is this allowed, or why does our city government, our city council allow such bad behavior?
Yeah, they do reward bad behavior, which is unfortunate. It's really a mess. I'm wondering too, I was thinking about this. I know you're talking about Columbus, Ohio, but I've actually seen a number of stories in reference to police brutality in Akron, Ohio as well. One of my viewers actually informed me that it's also a big issue in Akron. So there have been a number of videos that have come through in that particular area. And it's not just unique to parts of Ohio, you guys. This happens all across the country. And again, the big issue is the qualified immunity. So as long as they have that, they know that they're going to be protected.
They can use that as a defense, a get a jail free card. Yes, in Akron, we had Jalen Walker, who the cops fired at least, let's say 90 times, and 46 bullets hit his body. There was no charges. They got qualified immunity because they said they feared for their lives. How do you fear for your life? He had no gun, didn't fire a weapon, because he turned around as if, I guess they thought he was going to shoot them with this magic weapon. It's just insane. I guess they use the word reasonable, or they thought, their perception. There's so much that goes with that qualified immunity defense.
But they can also, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But they can also use the excuse that the person was resisting, even if they're not resisting too.
Well, that goes back to the Ohio versus Terry, started back in 1968, right here in Ohio, where the Supreme Court ruled that a cop can reasonably pull you over and search you. Reasonable officer can. If he deems that you have broken the law, stop and frisk, all goes back to the Supreme Court.
It's terrible. And I want people to understand that when these situations happen in reference to police brutality, we pay for that, by the way. All the costs that Cynthia was just talking about, we pay for that. That comes out of our taxpayer dollars. So it's not, this should be something that everyone's concerned with, whether you're on the side of the police or not on the side of the police. You should still be concerned that your taxpayer money is paying for all of those fees and services every time there is a police brutality case.
Yes, we stress that as we go throughout Ohio with our listening tour. Plus, as well, every wrongful conviction starts with what? Police misconduct. It starts with them when they frame, lie, and get, all these false confessions. And like I said, maybe I didn't. Cleveland, Ohio is number one in the nation for convicting Black men to death. So then Innocent Projects comes along and they find out that the prosecutors withheld evidence. And once again, the taxpayer are going to foot those $1 million payouts.
That's what I think some people may not have been aware of, because the Innocent Project as well, shout out and props to them for taking the time to look into these cases. But at the same time, it's like, this is after the fact. So it's reacting instead of preventing. And this is something I think that can really lead the way. This coalition in Ohio, I feel like that's being proactive instead of reactive. Let's get out in front of it. Let's try to end qualified immunity and prevent these incidents from happening. How do you feel? Have you had a chance to speak to any police officers in Ohio, and how do they feel about this? Just curious.
I've had a chance to talk to several police officers, and many of them agree that an officer, if they're doing their job, they do not have to have qualified immunity. Why? Mm-hmm. Why should they have, if they're doing their job and they're not violating someone's civil liberties? They're not depriving that person of their rights. In Ohio, I like to say, like the Holy Roller says, your God-given rights. So yes, Dr. Hamza Kabar is on the committee, and he is law enforcement. He's former military, PhD in policy, and he just got hired by the Cleveland police to investigate police misconduct. So that's saying a lot right there for the Cleveland, Ohio Police Department to hire Dr. Hamza Kabar. And he has his own, nonprofit, Lear, which is he wants to end it in 38 states qualified immunity. So they know where he stands on this issue.
That is interesting. I also wanted to point out here as well, you do have a calendar on here as well. I wanted to share with people because you also list events here. One of the events was ACLU Qualified Immunity Panels. So there have been panels that you've hosted. There have been Pizza Plus petitions, weekly social that you're hosting. So if any of you are watching and you're in the Columbus area in Ohio, you should definitely check this out. I have to tell you, Cynthia, this is the first one that I've seen that is this organized. Like, it's just very much together.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. It means a lot to me. Yes, we're doing our best. We're very passionate about this issue. I'm out here myself, boots on the ground, collecting signatures, going to libraries, different events for, Black History Month. We've partnered with certain people in Lima, and I'm from Youngstown, NAACP. So we have our signatures together. We want to make sure that we have like an extra 200 because they're going to throw so many out. But we've been good on our signature count, and I'm just grateful to everyone who takes the time to sign the petition and listen, to us.
Awesome, Cynthia. Thank you so much. And guys, for those of you watching, again, this is just another example of something that you can get done in the States instead of trying to get this done on the national level. Because I think we're all really frustrated politically, and things just not really going the way that we want them to. But you have to remember that you do have power at the local level, and you have to use that power.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I'd love to bring you back on another time. We also do a call-in portion of the show as well. And I'd love to bring you on call-in because a lot of times I do that show and people, they'll ask questions like, well, how do I do this? And how do I do that? I'd love to have you on call-in to take questions from the viewers. I'm pretty sure some of them are wondering, well, how can I do this in my state as well?
Oh, I would love to come back. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
back and updating you, next month about, are we going to be on the ballot when we're pushing for that big 400 plus thousand. So we're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Sabrina.
All right, guys, that was the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity. Again, they're trying to do that through the states. I highly recommend you go to that website, check it out. Eric has the link in the chat and see what they're doing there. Again, just another example of something that you can get done through the states instead of actually hoping these politicians get something done for us. This is a way that you can kind of take initiative yourself. Myra's mama said, I live in Ohio. Yay, I'll be paying close attention to this. Yeah, I think there are a number of you actually that are in Ohio. It's really interesting. I see some of the comments in the chat as well. Great project there, you guys. Great project.